Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
My thoughts were just like eating me alive. They were just eating me up and I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I was having such a hard time with my Tourette's and my anxiety and my learning disabilities. Just like everything came collapsing. I was losing friends. My friend group was falling apart. Just everything about my life was like, I felt like it was over, you know, as it feels when you're a teen girl. I just decided, you know, I need a purpose. I need to work. I need to put my time into something so I'm not just sitting here moping around because I can't do this anymore.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. So recently I've been putting out a fill-in-the-blank prompt. Tourette's podcast would be better if fill-in-the-blank. I want to thank everyone who's responded. A lot of great suggestions to consider. I'll get to the most popular suggestion in just a second, but the reason I put that out there is I don't want Tourette's podcast to become too predictable or stale. And that's mostly a worry of self-criticism, I think, but I ask a lot of the same questions, and I say a lot of the same things week to week. And, you know, because that's my experience. That's also my basis of curiosity and wanting to learn about other people. And I've evolved a lot over the past 5 seasons of the podcast. But as it happens, even though I'm asking some repeat questions episode to episode, the answers are so often different or illustrated in an individual way with a lot of diversity. That just gives the question fresh identity. And a lot of you pointed that out and basically said, don't change anything about the podcast. Just keep it going. And that's awesome, especially as it keeps everything as natural as possible in terms of conversation. I'm glad you appreciate that. These aren't prepared interviews. I'm not submitting a list of questions to the guests ahead of time. That would kind of destroy the point of conversation and just discovering things about one another that we couldn't plan for. But the most popular would be better if response I got is when I feel bad for not delivering on more. And I promise to in the future, starting with this episode, and that's to talk with more teenagers. Parents were suggesting this too. They wanted to hear from more teens. And we've got a couple coming up, including on this episode, an extremely articulate and bright and funny 13-year-old who we'll introduce you to in just a minute. Real quick, I'll say we're really on the home stretch of season 5, but 5 is followed by 6. And so I'll be booking guests before long. And if you're a teenager listening and you're about to send an email to me about being on an episode, just make sure that, if possible, that it comes with permission from your parents or guardians. I prefer that, but I've also heard from kids whose parents don't get it and have not been supportive, and I don't want to leave them out either. Or leave you out if that describes your situation. We'll figure it out. Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com if you have any suggestions about that, but keep the feedback coming. That door is always open. I want to give a shout out to Big Wendy, aka Wendy Diaz. You'll remember she was our finale guest in season 3. At the time, she was getting a lot of cool attention for being a notable contestant on the reality show Survivor, where she got to talk about her Tourette Syndrome a bit. But she's so much more interesting than just being Wendy from Survivor. She's got some Guinness World Records now, involving pretty amazing things that she can do with Rubik's Cubes. Like seriously, her Instagram, it's at Big Wendy with 3 Ys, so BIGWENDYYY on Instagram. Seriously, look her up and look at the animations that she makes out of Rubik's Cubes. It's ridiculous. It's so cool. And one of her world records, I think she has more than one, is most Rubik's Cubes solved while hula hooping. She solved 100 Rubik's Cubes while hula hooping. Anyway, I bring her up now because she transmitted one of her tics to me. So within the Tourette community, for people who don't know, tics are contagious if you already have Tourette Syndrome. So I might pick up a tic from somebody else. And I definitely picked up one from Wendy. She has a sign of the cross tic. I did a video interview with her where she was doing that, and it transmitted to me, just watching her do that in repetition. I adopted a version of that, and I couldn't stop pecking my forehead. And that tic has really stuck with me. So Wendy issued me a sort of offset to that, so to speak, by making a Tourette teal hat for my cat, Spot. And I love it. He actually wears it. There's a picture up on the Tourette's podcast Instagram of Spot wearing a Tourette hat. Spot's really been a hit with the followers. Just wanted to publicly thank Wendy and say this is proof that good things can come from sharing tics. Thank you, Wendy. Wanted to update you real quick on some of the things the Tourette Association is offering the community. No matter where you're from, I'm thankful we have a global audience here. If you go to Tourette.org and click on the events link, you'll see something called Tourette Connections. It's a virtual webinar series running through August 5th. Some of the webinar titles coming up are Habit Reversal for Children with Tic Disorders, Successful Relationships Between School Staff and Parents, Treatment of Tic Disorders and Other Repetitive Behaviors, Workplace Accommodations and Disability Rights, and a lot more. This is totally free, and I believe this comes from the TAA Wisconsin chapter. Check it out, Tourette.org, and find it through the events portal. I'll link to it in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com as well. Just want to keep reminding you that if Tourette is still a topic you're trying to learn about for yourself or for a family member, Tourette.org has a lot for you. Okay, this week on this episode, we've got Shylah, who a lot of you might recognize on social media as Simply Tourettes. That's her handle. She's got a YouTube channel under that name as well. I really like this one video she has called Clean With Me and Talk About Advocacy, which is a great concept. It's just her hanging out in a room and cleaning up her place and airing her thoughts about advocacy while she's doing it. Like, it feels like a hangout. And I think a lot of you are going to relate to that concept of needing to have a couple activities going at once for you to feel collected, which is a brilliant concept. Shylah also did a great talk with Britney Wolf on the One Tic at a Time YouTube channel. She did that a while back. I'll drop a link to that in the show notes with this episode. As I've said with the past couple episodes, this conversation was recorded before the world events that have inspired so much societal change. So if it sounds like we're talking obliviously, I think that's a word, to the things transpiring right now, it's just because we recorded this several months ago. All right, let's get to it. Here's Shylah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Shylah, or Simply Tourettes. I am from New Jersey, and I am a YouTuber / advocate for Tourette Syndrome, and I am here with Ben.
And what's your rough age bracket? Is it 10 to 20, 20 to 30?
Probably 10 to 20.
Were you diagnosed as a kid, or is this something I've been hearing more from people later? Who I guess they've experienced it their whole lives, but the diagnosis came later on, or
right.
And that seems to be kind of a factor in kind of how they dealt with their TS. But where do you land on that?
I started having my tics around 6 or 7, though my family noticed I was a little bit different than other kids my entire life, like even different than other babies. Like, I would just act different.
Yeah.
Even like not tics, just like I would act different. I had like immense anxiety about my mom leaving me and abandoning me always. And I got diagnosed at 11.
Okay, yeah. So your mom and my mom could probably trade similar stories. I mean, she had a lot of similar observations that even before tics, just things about me seemed different. Like, if I was left alone, then, I would kind of have a freak out moment. If I had people around and something or several objects to kind of occupy my attention,
right,
then I was good. But other than that, I felt like I was in a crisis or something.
Yeah, I always felt like different than other kids too, and the way I interacted with other people.
Yeah, I get that too. It's sort of this. I think growing up, I always had this uncertainty when I was trying to be cool with other people or interact with other people in a way where I was hoping they would accept me, but I just kind of felt like I was playing a part or something.
Right. Because I had a disinhibition growing up where I would say things that I was thinking. My filter was broken.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say things to other kids that were really mean, but I didn't realize that it was really mean. And they would be like, "Why did you say that?" And I'd be like, "I don't know," because it was what I was thinking.
Yeah, I had some of that too. But in a way, I kind of feel like it was maybe kind of tied in with the fact that I was maybe kind of socially behind on things. I didn't, and this all kind of relates, but I didn't pick up on social cues, and I would just kind of talk. And I think just kind of like the inward eye on me, and the fact that I just kind of wasn't up on, how society acted and talked. And, I kind of isolated myself in a lot of ways when I was a little kid.
Definitely.
I feel like I just didn't know what was like good or bad to say, or right or wrong, or inappropriate, or what. And I was also just kind of like self-sheltered, I guess. And I just didn't come across, like the everyday kid, I guess.
Yeah. So I kind of I wouldn't say I got bullied, but I definitely got teased for being like quote unquote weird. I got called weird a lot because I didn't act the same as other kids.
So you had vocal tics and motor tics, and were these things that even before you got diagnosed at age 11 that you were kind of questioning for yourself, or your family was questioning, or like what am I doing?
I remember the first day I ever ticked. We were in Bible study, and we were all like gathering around for prayer, and I was like, what is the worst thing I can do right now? And I was like, probably cough. And then I started getting like a coughing tic. So I would clear my throat constantly, and everyone just thought I had like allergies or something, as parents do. So we tried everything. At some point, I think my parents thought I was like lactose intolerant for some reason.
Yeah.
So yeah, we tried literally everything, but then after like a little while, different things would come in, and all of a sudden, like after a few years, I started getting motor tics. After a bunch of vocal tics. So once I started getting motor tics and shaking my head, that's when we knew things were like really wrong.
Yeah, stuff that's too complex to be an allergic response. Yeah. And because I have heard of a lot of people using allergies as kind of the mask.
Yeah.
And, like, oh, yeah, it's just, sorry, allergies are bad this time of year. And they're making grunting sounds, or, even with the eye blinking and everything like that, all that kind of comports with allergies.
Yeah.
But when things get so complex and you can't really predict always where your TS is going to go, then, you have to kind of search for the alternate answer when people start asking. And the diagnosis, is that something that felt good when it came? Or, I mean, you sometimes hear people say, well, I'm glad I got an answer. But at the same time, it's like, oh boy, here's a brand new universe of stuff I have to worry about.
Well, I was 11 at the time, so I didn't really think too much of it. I was like, okay, I have an answer now. But I didn't realize like my whole life would kind of change now, because people weren't pointing out and telling me to stop anymore. People are a lot nicer to me, but at the same time, like, I didn't want them to pity me.
Yeah.
That I was kind of worried about. I didn't want people to pity me and be like, oh my gosh, she has a disorder, I feel so bad for her.
I get that.
Because that's not what it was, like I'm still me.
Yeah, sometimes people overcorrect, even when they have, like good intentions, that they want to be sensitive to whatever you're dealing with, but they kind of overshoot in the event that they come up short and they're still being insensitive around you, or not calibrated how they properly should be. I've had that, and I had that when I was a little kid in different ways, where people addressed me in a different way than they would other kids. And even kind of in my adult life, in a way, when I explain it, their voices get, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm not criticizing people who are trying to listen to me, but their voices kind of soften and they get kind of motherly in a way, and really gracious. And it I'm like, no, you don't got to do all that. It's
I totally get that. Yeah. Because before, I think everyone felt like a little bit bad, because before I had Tourette's, there was somebody else in my close proximity who also had Tourette's.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but he was not diagnosed, but he does have it. And we were feeding off of each other's tics, but neither of us knew what Tourette's was. So I had more prominent tics, so they kind of like sat me down and gave me a stern talking to and told me I had to stop because I was triggering him and whatever he had.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, because he also had this thing where, what is it called? This thing where like he could hear a pin drop in a room.
Okay, so to where it would irritate him,
like he could hear thing. Yeah, and it would irritate him.
Like a misophonia type thing.
Yes, misophonia. That's what he had. And my tics were like clearing my throat, and that would bother him a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So we would just kind of like feed off of each other constantly. So we couldn't be in the same room together. We couldn't watch movies together, you know?
That's interesting.
And then finally, when I was diagnosed, everyone was like, "Oh, okay, sorry."
Yeah. So after the diagnosis, I mean, so people regard you differently, and did you regard yourself differently in terms of having, you know, maybe a sense of what you could or couldn't do about it? I mean, I assume you knew at the time that, you know, this is not something that's going to be cured. You know, it may kind of wax and wane or go away altogether, but, you know, but you at least have to regard it as an actual thing at that point.
Yeah, because my doctor, as soon as I was diagnosed, I walked into the room and started ticking, and my neurologist was like, "You have Tourette's." And I was like, "All right."
There it is.
I was like, "You know right away." And he was like, "Sadly, there is no cure for it." And I'm like, "There's no cure for it." I'm like, "Well, this sucks."
Well, did you? So, were you in a situation where you really wanted to do something about it?
Definitely. Because I also had learning disabilities, and the Tourette's, the learning disabilities, just like they feed off of each other. So I want to do something about the Tourette's, so my learning disabilities weren't as bad.
Gotcha.
So he prescribed me some medication, and it took like 3 years, or 2 years, sorry. But now I am mostly tick-free. I still have some tics, but I am on Topamax, and that's taken away most of them.
So without the urge to tick and the pressure to tick, I mean, is there a noticeable kind of difference in how you carry yourself day to day?
Definitely. I just think different. I don't like there's something different with my brain. I'm not so obsessive. I'm not like, I don't narrate everything I do now. My life just feels less dark now, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I gotcha. And probably a little less unpredictable.
Right, yeah.
So does that feel, I guess surrounding your TS, a lot of people have, you know, the comorbids, the anxiety, depression, things like that. And sometimes tics. I've heard it said that, you know, tics are the symptom of something else going on. But at the same time, sometimes the tics are kind of what feed the depression and anxiety because of the sort of like self-image that you have. And did all that change once your tics were kind of under control? Or did you have that? Did you ever deal with that?
I definitely dealt with depression, as much as I didn't like want to admit that I did. But not having tics and not having anxiety, because I also went on a medication for my generalized anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
That definitely was helpful because I was definitely less insecure about it. Because when you have depression, you know, the negative thoughts just feed in, but when there's nothing there to think negatively about, you know, like there's nothing to feed the depression with. So
yeah. So I mean, do you feel like you have a pretty good command, so to speak, over things now?
Definitely.
Nice. So you mentioned the medication you take, and I'll say for the people listening, you know, it's going to be different for everybody. Not everybody's going to have the same experience with the same medication, and you may try the same thing and have completely different results. But and there's a lot of options out there too. You know, different things that will work for different people that may not work for you, Shylah. But I like that there's hope to where the things that bother you, you can kind of get them under control. And then you can kind of focus on the things that you even like about TS and maybe what it's done for your life. A lot of people talk about it in positive terms, and a lot of people credit their talents, or at least trace their talents to their experience with TS. and to kind of like celebrate those things while the parts that bother you are kind of somewhat kept back. I mean,
Yeah.
do you have any sort of things about yourself that you connect with TS that are not tic related that you think are maybe a positive?
I mean, I never would have been able to become an advocate and do this. Like, I think about the fact that I never would have had like a purpose. Like, this gave me a purpose. My purpose is to spread awareness and be an advocate for Tourette's, and Tourette's gave me that purpose. And without it, I would be doing something else.
And so you set up a YouTube channel. I mean, you're on Instagram and everything like that. There's a lot of advocacy work you do. What was that decision like? Because even with starting this podcast, I had to kind of go through the brain exercise of that there has to be a self-acceptance piece. You have to be kind of okay with people knowing this about yourself. And I wasn't even sure about that when I started the podcast. I wasn't even to that point yet. I was still working on it. But it becomes a thing that you become proud of the work you do and you're connecting with other people. And I mean, what was kind of the thought process in starting a YouTube channel, and what kind of stuff are you putting on there?
The thought process in starting a YouTube channel was probably I got really depressed last summer. And my thoughts were just like eating me alive. They were just eating me up, and I couldn't deal with it anymore.
Yeah.
And I was having such a hard time with my Tourette's and my anxiety and my learning disabilities. Just like everything came collapsing. I was losing friends. My friend group was falling apart. Just everything about my life was like, it felt like it was over, as it feels when you're a teen girl.
Yeah. I said, yeah, like I know, but.
And I just decided, I need a purpose. I need to work. I need to put my time into something, so I'm not just sitting here moping around because I can't do this anymore. So I made my Instagram after I begged my mother to give me social media. And she did. So I made my Instagram. It kind of grew from like a little blog to me editing photos. And then I started my YouTube channel, and I do, advocate videos about my Tourette's and my POTS. So yeah.
That's cool. And I mean, it's gained some following. I mean, the name Simply Tourettes is like one that I came across pretty quickly when I started, when I started the podcast, but also just trying to connect with people on social media and learn more about the different personalities out there and who's already doing what kind of advocacy work. And it was cool to see. And I love that Elizabeth McDonald drew a picture of you for your avatar. Like those are amazing. I love how those are getting around.
She's amazing. She's such an amazing artist.
And for people listening, that's who designed the Tourette's podcast logo for this season, which was just updated.
She did a really good job with that. Yeah,
I was stoked on that. I was happy. But so, what kind of material ideas? Like what kind of prompts a post in terms of awareness? Is it just something that you happen to be experiencing, or do you have a list of things where you're like, this is stuff we need to be talking about, or is it just kind of based on kind of what you're feeling at the time and what you wish people would know about you?
It's usually what I'm feeling at the time, things I'm experiencing. It's kind of everything. Like if I feel like I want to talk about medication because that's been on my mind as of late and stuff, then I'm going to talk about it. Or if I feel like, or if I just got, if I just got made fun of in public for my Tourette's, then I'll probably talk about that, just like examples of what it's like living with Tourette's on a day-to-day basis, because it's not easy and people don't realize that.
Does that still happen to you? I know you have a pretty good sense of command over your TS now, but are there still instances where it's awkward in public, or people are pointing things out about you, or even commenting?
Yeah. I just went to the store for the first time in like 3 months, and still I'm the weirdest thing people have ever seen.
Oh, God. What are people, is it worse now? With, we've all kind of been, we've been under these, stay at home orders or advisories, and we kind of adjust to a new environment, or at least I have. I'm not going anywhere.
It's been nice for the past few months not having to go anywhere, but I went to the store a few days ago, even with my mask on.
Yeah.
And I'm like screaming, chickens. And people are like, where did the noise come from? Because they can't see it out of my mouth because I have a mask on.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, what? They're like looking over. They're like, what the heck?
I didn't even think about that. I got a teal mask for the Tourette colors, and I do have to make a grocery store trip because it's just that time, and maybe I'll lean on that a little bit. The people can't trace it to me.
It's like a little hideout, Felt a little freeing.
So your first time out. So was there just something about the very nature of that, about being around other people, and it's kind of a nervous situation still. Did that kind of flare it up for you?
It definitely always flares things up for me. Whenever I'm around people, it flares up my tics and then my anxiety, even if I only have a little bit of them. I always shake whenever I'm out in public, like uncontrollably. Or even when I talk to people, I was shaking before this.
How are you shaking? I mean, is it a really visible thing? And is it more just kind of like something you do in waves where you kind of jolt yourself? Because I do that specifically, but...
Yeah, probably waves and kind of like my hands and fingers, they shake. So, yeah.
How have your urges to tic or your tics changed over time, besides the sort of establishment of medication and the effect that might have had on you?
I'd say that things have probably, before the medication, things were getting more serious. I feel like the medication kind of blocked it out, but if I stopped going on the medication, then my Tourette's would still be here. Like, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it kind of started with small vocal tics when I was younger. Then it moved over to tiny motor tics, big motor tics. Then I stopped with the vocal tics for a while, and the vocal tics came back up, and now I have like really bad vocal tics. Like, I have coprolalia now. Fuck. Bullshit. Chickens. And I've never had like a word tic that wasn't a cuss word.
Yeah.
Like chicken, which I only developed like a week ago. Fuck, chicken, bullshit.
I developed a tic that is really... I've never had a word tic until recently, and I don't necessarily... Well, I am kind of feeling the urge to do it now, but I don't do it around other people, or haven't had the opportunity to. I just do it around my pets at the house. And I've already told her about this. Heather, who's the host of the Sunshine and Power Cuts podcast, it's on the same network as Tourette's podcast. She's from New Zealand, and she pronounces her name like Heather. And I say that nonstop around the house. And it's the very first time that I've gotten... And I know it's a tic because I'm just kind of doing it before I even know it. And then when I pay attention to it, it's unavoidable. It's the first time I've had a tic that is a word. And I'm kind of wondering if this is... if it's opening the curtain to like some new chapter of things, because that's different. And
right.
I'd never had a driving tic before until just recently, when I had to run some errands, and I had a photography job, and it was a fairly long commute. And I just had this horrible urge to keep slapping my turn signal down to the left. And I kept doing it and sitting at stoplights, even when I was turning right. I was, just kind of like... So I sat on my hand for a minute, and that one came on really, really strong as a new thing. The only thing I can think of is I had just retweeted a tweet about a study or a survey about driving tics. So there's always, it seems to be, there's something environmental that is put out into the world that I see that kind of helps to, like, my brain will kind of take a cue from that and like, that sounds like a tic. Cool, let's go with that. Hey, Ben, we got a new tic. And then
right.
I'm doing it, and it's a blitz for a while.
Yeah, definitely. When I get like a weird tic that I've never done before, because it's usually because I have so many friends online with Tourette's, and I'm usually watching them, and they're like, "Oh, I have this new cussing tic," and I'm like, "I hope I never get that." And then all of a sudden I get it. Fuck, bullshit.
It's kind Chickens. Of a that's a message too, and we've said this on the podcast before about kind of condemning, that may be too harsh of a word, but kind of underlining the instances where people say, like, yeah, I have TS, but it's not the swearing kind, where they have to like disassociate themselves from that because that's the bad kind of TS. And I see that as a really unfair thing. Like, we have TS. Who cares what your tics are in terms of appeal to the outside? And right. Like, why do we have to marginalize people within our own community? And what you were just saying is kind of a reminder to everybody else that you don't know what's in store for you. And if you seem okay because or if you're in the practice of saying, like, yeah, I have TS, but don't worry, it's not the swearing kind, you don't know what's coming down the road for you. It may be that. Yeah. And
I thought it was so awful. And then when I first got it, I was like, oh my gosh, my life is over. I'm going to be kicked out of church. Everything is awful. And then I just like lived with it. It's like, it's not that bad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still kind of it may be different and there may be more nerves that come with something new.
Yeah, like at this point, I don't care. I'll scream the F word if I want to. This is a free country.
That's right.
I live in America.
And for people listening, I mean, this is why I'm not, censoring anything out, because it's not like Shylah is like declaring or making any harsh statements. I mean, this is not something that she's like trying to do or wants to do. This is just, it's a tic. I don't censor this stuff. It doesn't have the meaning that you think it has behind it. And if I did censor it, that would kind of defeat the purpose of like, oh yeah, we got to cover that up. That's no good.
Yeah.
This is just something that you do and something I could be doing or something anybody listening could be doing.
Even my parents are like hardcore Christians, and even they know like it's fine because I have Tourette's. I can't control it. And I feel bad for anyone whose like parents don't allow that, or like, because I've seen people with Tourette's who have parents like who don't want them to curse or don't let them curse,
or tic at all.
Really awful. Yeah, or tic at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there can be like punishment sometimes that's meted out on them for doing something that's completely involuntary. It's
right. Even with the diagnosis.
Yeah, even with the diagnosis, even with it being established, sometimes.
Bullshit.
And I don't know if it's because it kind of looks so mystifying from the outside of like, it's. I think immediately it's hard to relate to because, even I have things that are, I don't have to do. I can stop. Like I can think a thought, something I want to say to somebody, but it may not be the wisest thing to say in that moment, so I control myself and I don't say it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people maybe kind of view tics like that. It's, well, you're, it's just your muscles. It's just your mouth. Or,
that's also what my mom told me before I like got diagnosed, because she didn't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. To where you could just.
I can't control it.
That's the part that's difficult for a lot of people to figure out and relate to. Yeah. And so that's why having these analogies, I think I did this a few seasons ago.
It's like a sneeze.
Yeah, like a sneeze, or like just hold your eyes open, try not to blink. Right. You're gonna feel that urge, and you're gonna blink, and the longer you wait,
The feeling of not ticking is so weird for me. It feels like sizzling in my brain, like soda. Like someone just shook up a bottle of soda and put it in my brain.
We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette Syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org. TOURETTE.org. Had you tried anything like And this is, well, not new, but still kind of new in terms of the conversation and access to it. Have you looked into anything like CBIT or anything like that?
My mom looked into CBIT about like a year ago, a little while after I got diagnosed. But I just told her that I wanted to try medication since we were doing that anyway. I did try CBIT, but the whole kind of CBIT thing is that you're supposed to like deal with the urge and then it's going to like go away.
Yeah, deal with the urge and have a kind of a competing response to it or a competing thought. And yeah, I'm way oversimplifying it, but
yeah, I didn't want to do that because like I found that like really painful.
Yeah, it doesn't work for everybody. And that's something that we just heard Dr. Candidly say that, you know, we need more study to kind of figure out maybe different angles of this and or maybe it in combination with some medications but, you know, it doesn't work for everybody. But it is interesting that it's a non-pharmaceutical approach that does involve kind of exercising the brain in a certain way. That's interesting. But what do you do that, is there any activities you do that where you can kind of give yourself a break from these tics and not necessarily feel the urge or feel so bothered by it? Art, any creative things or?
I said this with Britney, but I paint and I draw and that like stops them completely. And it always has for me.
So that's something we heard Louis Rossignol say at the beginning of this season. I mean, he's an amazing, I mean, I'll go ahead and say it, famous artist. And his art career was kind of a result of TS and finding something that kind of suspended the whole thing for him. And so he leaned into that, and that's all he does for a living now. I mean, he's not like an artist on the side. He's a professional artist, and TS led him there. It's really, really cool to see.
It's so amazing where Tourette's can lead some people or how they like use their disability or how people use their disabilities for good. Yeah.
And not be, you know, it's part of the story too. I mean, does that come out in your art in any way? I mean, would the TS narrative kind of be apparent in what you do? Doesn't have to be.
Not really.
So it's a break, and I mean, so the urges go away, or you're just not necessarily centrally focused on them, or what do you think it is?
Not focused on them, no urges whatsoever.
Wow. That is so cool.
Yeah. It's like, it's always been that way, even when I was younger.
What do you want to do? I mean, do you have much kind of pinned down as a career option? Is art something that you'd like to pursue even from a professional standpoint, or is it just something you get enjoyment out of?
I was most definitely thinking about pursuing art, but, you know, there are a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
So I would say I'm definitely exploring my options right now. I don't want to do YouTube as a full-time thing. I kind of want to do that, you know, as a side thing.
Yeah.
As a hobby. But yeah, art is something I'm very, very passionate about.
Is there anything else in like any sort of academic subjects that you tend to excel at?
Probably history and
love history.
Language arts.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am too. I was all about history, and I majored in English in college. I didn't really do much direct with it except to become a writer, or I became a journalist after that. But yeah, that's exactly where I landed. I mean, I'm a history junkie. I love
going to historical sites.
Yeah, I love historical sites. I love bringing my camera out there and just kind of relating to past contexts. And
I love learning about like World War I, World War II.
Yeah, and sort of what the life context of people was at that time, and trying to, I mean, you can never fully do this, but trying to put yourself in the shoes of people who really, truly, socially had to sacrifice a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And their lifestyle and outlook is nothing like what we have right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
insane.
It's kind of a fun's the wrong word, but interesting kind of game to play of going through history and just sort of thinking about how maybe what you would be doing at that time or how you would be regarded. And I'm not necessarily going to the angle of, it sounds like I am, but I'm not going to the angle of, you know, people with TS being regarded as witches or the possessed or that sort of thing.
Although that could have happened back then.
Oh, well, there were a lot of people who likely had TS, whose, I guess, sort of documented symptoms were tics and blurting out involuntary things. And
you're a witch.
Yeah.
Yep.
Simple as
See
that.
if she drowns. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. But that's fun to do. I love historical sites. I love I love historical documentaries. I love just kind of knowing where we came from and how we got to where we are.
Yeah, most definitely.
What haven't I asked about that you think is important, or anything to help people know sort of where you come from? I'll give a shout out to Britney Wolf, who did a wonderful interview with you. She's fantastic. I mean, she's such a great advocate, and she was actually she was one of the inspirations for me starting this podcast to begin with. One of the first people I talked to.
Yeah, she was one of the inspirations for me starting my Instagram.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, she was like the first YouTuber my mom ever found when she was looking for someone to understand my TS.
That is so cool. It's neat kind of having this, and this kind of goes back to history too. You know, the fact that we didn't have this network that we have now, to where, you know, you can find somebody in a completely different part of the world who directly relates to you and can be a really great resource to you. And, you know, it can help you kind of reframe your life, and because they have what you have, and they've been through this, and, you know, I'm still figuring it out for myself, like, very much. But it's neat reaching out to people like you, people like Britney. There's so many examples of people who have different ways of regarding it that I can apply to my life, that I wouldn't have had access to, you know, say back in the 1980s or earlier. And it's kind of neat, I don't know, just to have this sort of like this net.
Yeah, there are so many people with so many different experiences in the TS community. And just like relating to so many different people over the years. It's been amazing.
What's the bottom line for you? What do you wish people either knew about TS, or where do you hope all this kind of heads for the TS community? Do you have like a single kind of mission or a wish of outcomes?
Just more awareness, you know?
Yeah.
Just knowing what it is, because people are so ignorant nowadays. Even actual doctors. I went to my cardiologist, and she told me that because I have a chronic illness, POTS, she told me that Tourette's wasn't that hard to deal with in comparison to POTS.
Yeah, that's a pretty relative statement.
You don't compare two things like that. I'm like, that's awful.
Yeah.
I'd probably put them right next to each other. Like, they're both equally as hard to deal with. They're both really hard things.
Plus, that's kind of that's a weird thing to say if you're looking for some perspective on POTS. You know, it's like, you thought you had it bad, you know, guess what you got now? That's a really weird thing for a doctor to say. That's not very comforting.
Yeah. And she also was like, do you have any other conditions? You don't look like you have anxiety, so I'm just going to put that down. And I'm like,
what?
I do have anxiety. I have generalized anxiety disorder. She's like, oh, okay. I was like, what? I was like, why would you make that judgment?
Yeah, you didn't have the visible marks on your body of anxiety, so I'm going to go ahead and say it's not a big issue.
Apparently. I was like, I guess I'm anxiety free.
Wow, that's a little loose.
Yeah.
Wow.
She thought she knew everything, because apparently her brothers also had Tourette's.
Oh, wow. Okay. So someone who has medical training.
My brothers have Tourette's, so it's not that hard to deal with. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's
that's a bold statement.
So you're not kidding. Awareness is that's the big goal, because, and you know, even just from a basic education standpoint on the medical provider side, you know, if we, I guess, knew more accurately, if society talked more accurately about what it is and versus what it isn't, then, you know, maybe the pressure on people with TS wouldn't be quite so bad, and maybe the stress level wouldn't be quite so bad, and maybe, you know, the the sort of suspense and anxiety that you feel when you're in a social situation or out in public or at an airport or wherever won't be quite so bad. And but it's the social part of it is such a huge piece of having this. It's not born from a social
kids,
situation, but
staring at me in grocery stores constantly.
Yeah.
And their parents stare too, and they don't tell the kids to stop. And I'm like, why? And I'm like,
yeah.
Do you stare at people in wheelchairs like that? Because if so, then that's awful.
Yeah, I remember when I was a teen, and there were other kids who would stare at me. Same kind of situation when I had certain kind of tics that were definitely eye-catching, and
yeah,
I was really kind of grumpy about everything at that stage of my life. I was really sensitive, and I was, I guess kind of prone toward anger, and I didn't deal with that stuff well. As an adult now, I kind of feel like if a kid, mom at the grocery store with her kid, the kid's looking over at me, noticing tics. The high road I would like to take is to kind of like smile and wave and, kind of like associate myself with something positive. But then if you're a grown man and you're at the grocery store and you're already coming off like a weirdo, and all of a sudden then now you're waving at, it's not that could be misinterpreted.
Doesn't look very good from an outsider's view.
Yeah. So, little.
Another reason we need more awareness.
Yeah. At least on the parents' end, it's hard for, like young children to be aware of everything at once. But, in terms of how adults regard it, react to it, maybe we can live in a world without the punishment, without parents saying, just hold it in. We're going to this dinner, just hold it in. Don't tick tonight. And, it's the way to make it worse.
That sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But, shout out to all the amazing parents out there who are doing a good job and who are supportive, especially like yours, they understand coprolalia is nothing that you can control, and it's happening. I mean, you're not in love with it. But
definitely not in love with it.
Yeah. It's just there.
At this point in my life, I've decided to just like stop being so insecure about it and just scream the F word if I want to. Fuck, bullshit. Chickens.
Well, good for you for, that takes a lot of bravery, and that's something that a lot of people still wrestle with, and I still wrestle with too. Even with my I don't have coprolalia. The tics I do have are, someone might say, not quite as severe, but just in the vacuum, in the social situation where I'm with someone or a stranger or my boss or something like that, and this person is not up on what I'm about to do, and I do it, that comes off. That can be a devastating thing that you think about through the rest of the day. We're like, oh God, what's this person think about me? And instead of having this command or this sort of level of awareness in the world where it's just not that much of a big deal, Tourette's is not also quite as rare as sometimes we think about it as. I mean,
like 1 in 100 individuals have it.
Yeah, and as we do, there are different parts of the world, where it's covered up because it's not. There may be pressure to not be open or outward about it because of the flaw aspects, and it's there's a lot of untold stories of TS, and I would never pressure anybody to tell a story they don't want to tell, but I love that we're doing this, and I love that you're doing what you're doing with awareness, and it's a cool way to be a role model for people who are seeking that stuff out, especially on social media. So I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, and every advocate out there who is doing this. It's such an amazing community. And when I joined this community, I had no idea like what I was joining, and I was like, I'm just gonna meet a few other people with Tourette's. I had no idea that the Tourette's community was so big.
Yeah,
and that it was like so widespread. And And then I gained following, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have so many friends.
All different kinds of people around the world. It's not just one type of person. And it's neat to see.
And I got to hear so many people's different perspectives and stories and talk to so many people and try and help so many people. And that was like a gift from God,
Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Shylah for being such a fantastic guest. Give her a follow on the social media channels, look up Simply Tourettes. I'll also have the various links in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com. I want to hear from you too, whether it's a response to this episode or an idea you have or a suggestion for the podcast to improve, or just to say, hi, here's what I've been up to. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. I still have some emails to answer, and a few more of you have sent me pics of your pets. The door stays open for that. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Tourette's Podcast is made possible by the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. Go there, read, find answers to questions, and if you can, make a donation, because your support fuels what they do, and you can feel good knowing that your donation isn't just about the resources that come back to you in return, but in knowing that it helps out lots and lots of other people altogether. Tourette.org. Tourette's Podcast is part of the Geeks Rising Network, geeksrising.com, where you can hear all past episodes of Tourette's Podcast, as well as the Bandrew Says podcast, Sunshine and Power Cuts, On the Subject, Conversations with Creators, and more. geeksrising.com, the best possible home for Tourette's Podcast. Join the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, maintained by Sophia in the UK. The best admin we could ask for. Join the group, say hey to hundreds of other like-minded people, ask questions. It's always positive there. Thank you so much for listening and interacting and for your advocacy. We'll talk to you again next week. This is Ben.